All right. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's Exploring by Seat Your Pants event. My name is Joe Grabowski, and I will be your host for today. So as we gather, we are reminded that throughout Canada, we are situated on Indigenous lands, both ceded treaty land and unceded land. It is steeped in rich Indigenous history and home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people today. As a country, we have a responsibility for the stewardship of the land on which we live and work. So today I want to acknowledge the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, of the Anishnawbekwe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Neutral people on whose territory or traditional territory I'm broadcasting to you live from today. So this is always one of our favorite weeks of the school year. Every October, well, this is our second year, I guess, so I shouldn't say every October yet, but we celebrate Secret Path Week along with the Gord Downie and Chanie Wenjack Fund. So Secret Path Week is really a time to remember the legacies of Gord Downie, the legacies of Chanie Wenjack, and to shed a light on residential schools, the history of them in Canada, to shed a light on reconciliation and things we can do to grow closer together as a nation. And all week long, we are going to meet, incredible First Nations artists, leaders, scientists. It's going to be a really great week. So we're kicking things off today. You can head over to exploringbytheseat.com and check under special events. You can find all the Secret Path Week events that we do have coming up, and you can register. There's probably a few camera spots left in some events as well. You can tune into any of the events live on YouTube or afterwards. So we have an amazing week coming up. It's going to be really special, and I'm so excited to have such a big group of classrooms joining us to kick things off this morning. So I'm really excited today to introduce Jessica Perritt. She is Section Manager, Indigenous Knowledge and Reconciliation at the Nuclear Waste Management Organization. So she started there in 2008 and has been instrumental in creating their Indigenous Knowledge policy, their reconciliation policy, as well as liaising with the Council of Elders and Youth. So she works to bridge the knowledge gaps between Western science on one side and Indigenous knowledge on the other, really to bring those Indigenous perspectives and ensure that Indigenous knowledge is being respected in its application. So Jessica, it's so great to have you join us live today. I'm going to bring you in and I'm going to let you take over for a little bit.
Great. Thank you so much, Joe. Bonjour, Ani, Epagishmakwa, Dishnakas. My name is Jessica Perritt, as Joe said, but I also have an Anishnawbe name, which is Anishnawbekwe, which means end of the earth bear woman. So I am a proud Anishnawbe person, which is Ojibway, and I am from Chippewas and Nawash First Nation, which is on the Georgian Bay and Bruce Peninsula. And if people are familiar with Tobermory, my community is just about an hour south of that on the water. And my community name is Nawash, which is a point of land which is surrounded by 3 points of water. So today I'm going to talk to you a bit about Indigenous knowledge, what Indigenous knowledge is, and how we can create space and build understanding about Indigenous knowledge and make sure that we're incorporating that into different things we're doing, whether that's in the classroom, whether that's with projects happening nationally, whether that's within industry, whether that's in office buildings, all sorts of things. So first I'm going to ask a question out to the group. When you think about science, what do you think about? Is there anybody that wants to just shout out stuff when they think about science?
Okay, I'm going to put a few classrooms on the spot here.
Okay.
To shout out. So here we go. Let's start with Mrs. Gill's group. What do you think about when you think about science?
Chemistry. Okay, Alex, do you want to go to the screen for a second?
Or you can shout out nice and loud, whatever's easier.
Okay, nice and loud, Alex.
I think of chemistry when I think of science, because it sort of incorporates the main base elements of everything.
Wow, we got a future chemist on our hands. Okay, anybody else?
Let's check St. Paul. What do you think of science?
What do we think of science? Landon, do you have something? Evangeline?
I think of like nature and stuff.
Did you hear that, Jessica? Nature.
Yes, we think about nature. There's a lot we can learn from science and nature. Great.
Let's try one more group. Let's go to Mrs. Chang's group at Regent Heights. What do you think of when you think of science? You'll just have to unmute for me.
What do you guys think? Iman? Go for it.
You think of the world around us and how everything works and where it all came from.
Great.
Great one.
Well, I still have St. Regent Heights. When you think about a scientist, what do you think of? What comes to mind when you think of a scientist?
Samaya? You can't see it there. Chemicals, she said?
Okay. People working with chemicals. We're very good. Awesome. Okay, great.
Oh, Space.
Space, yeah. Astronauts, they're scientists for sure.
What's he?
People who kind of like test things like ancient bones and stuff.
Like archaeology?
Archaeology is perfect. Lots of really great examples of scientists. Okay, so I'm going to go through a little bit of a presentation, and my goal today is to kind of change your or expand, I guess, your understanding of what you think science is and who scientists are in Canada. So I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, let me see here. Okay. So just like we said, when we think of science, what we primarily see is we see chemistry, we see equations, we see microscopes and equipment, people working in laboratories, just like everybody shared. When we think of scientists, normally what we see on TV is people working in laboratories, people working on the land too, working with equipment, understanding things, wearing their lab coats. So similar to what we heard in the classrooms. So within our First Nation, Métis, and Inuit communities, we also have science. And we have many examples throughout history of our science and how it's been practiced. So for instance, when we think about a teepee, or we see an image of a teepee, do we think about the architecture that goes into building that teepee and making sure we understand the different angles to putting up those poles and how we create that perfect circle, you know, the airflow that goes into that teepee so we can have a fire inside of it and it keeps us warm at night. So there's a lot of engineering and physics that goes into building that teepee. Same as a canoe. Canoe making is actually from First Nations people, and it's been around for thousands and thousands of years. And we actually invented the canoe. And the engineering, again, that goes into making sure that we build that canoe out of birch bark, and that canoe can hold people in it, and it can float across the rivers and the lakes so people could travel throughout different communities and trade with one another. So the canoe is a huge example of architecture and mathematics and engineering that goes into building that. We also have a lot of medicines within our communities. So we have a really good understanding of how the plants and the animals work in the environment and the different properties those plants have that can make us feel good and help us from getting sick. So for instance, sometimes we have a cold, we take cough medicine, or we take Tylenol. Our mom and dad gives us Tylenol. But within our First Nation communities, sometimes we take cedar tea because cedar is a plant that grows in the earth. And First Nations people understand that cedar has properties in it that helps us get over those colds and those sicknesses that happen to us during this time of year. And actually, when COVID happened, all of our communities from across Canada went out and they started picking their traditional medicines that they knew off the land, so that they made sure they had those medicines within their community. And they even started drinking cedar tea. And that's what me and my kids did at home. We started drinking cedar tea every day as just a preventative tea, because we know how much vitamin C is actually in that cedar. Similarly, we actually have a lot of knowledge about how the stars work. And we heard about an astronaut and how they have really good understanding of how the planets and the stars work. And in fact, Indigenous people in Canada have been mapping out the stars and the planets for centuries and have that understanding. And through that, they've created their own calendar systems and understand how time works. through their understanding of how the stars and how the planets work. So that's something that we've had within our communities for generations, and that's passed down to us. We also hear about this time of year, we call it harvest season, where people are going out and they're picking their plants and stuff they need to get through the winter. And one of those activities is hunting. And we think about somebody that goes out and hunts a moose, or we hear now about in school how the First Nation people used to hunt the buffalo, but they had an understanding of the biology of how that buffalo, every part of that animal and how it worked, and how they could use every part of that animal in a different way, whether it was through consuming its meat and eating it and surviving off the meat, or using its hides for clothing, and how they made sure they knew how to clean those hides so that they could produce clothing from it, they could produce tools from it. They had all sorts of different things they used with the animals to make sure that they provided all sorts of things to sustain their life over the winter months. And our Haudenosaunee friends, so I'm Anishnawbe, there's also Haudenosaunee, and they actually are really, they've invented so many different practices around harvesting. They're really experts in harvesting, particularly in corn, squash, and beans. And within that, they understood, or they understand, how the nutrients within each of those plants actually helps the other plant grow. And through that, they get amazing harvests of all of these 3 different plants, and understand the science of how those plants work together. And then we also have trappers, and they actually know how the animals migrate, and they have different systems of how they can collect those animals and understand how the animals move throughout the world and throughout our natural world. So we have a lot of examples within Indigenous communities about science, and we have that science as part of our knowledge system itself. It just may look a little bit different. So again, we have many scientists within our communities. We have engineers, we have doctors, we have people that harvest, and our scientists may, again, look a little bit different. Sometimes they look the same, because we also have people that are going to university and understanding that other aspect of science, that Western kind of aspect of science, of going to school and studying chemistry, or becoming a doctor, or becoming an engineer. But then they also have the understanding of science within their own knowledge systems, which is living off the land and understanding how the earth works. So scientists in our communities might look a little bit different. They might look like those grandmothers in our community that understand how the medicines work, and they have that knowledge of how medicines work. And if you're feeling bad, you would go to them as a doctor within your community. Or sometimes we have actual doctors that have went to university. So we have that real balance between how we access different scientists within our communities. So Indigenous knowledge is a knowledge system that's been in our communities for generations, and it's actually built on the understanding of how relationships work with Mother Earth. So the relationship between the stars and the land, the relationship between water, the plants, the animals, and even the relationship we have within all of those different things. And Western science is also a very strong knowledge system. When we go to school and we learn about chemistry, we learn about biology, we learn about mathematics and physics. But within Western science, things are very categorized, which is okay. They're just within different categories. And the difference between Indigenous knowledge and Western science is that Indigenous knowledge is about the relationship between all of those things and how they work together. Another big difference between Indigenous knowledge and Western science is that within Indigenous knowledge, we see all of those things, the plants, the animals, the air, the rocks, anything that the Mother Earth created, we see that as a relative. We see that as either our brother or our sister or our cousin. And we see the earth that we all live on as our mother. She gives us life. She provides that clean air that we breathe. She provides the clean water that we're able to drink. And so we see that as a mother, as she's able to give that life and provide that life. And so when you think about those just different views of science, when you see somebody as a relative or as a cousin or as somebody that you lean on for security and for wisdom, you treat them a little bit differently than you would when you don't. So that's something that is really important within our knowledge system. And I'm here to talk to you about if we create space for those other versions of science within our classrooms, within industry, within how we're working in corporations, that we actually have a better understanding of how things work. And by doing that, we'll create a better understanding and we'll be making better decisions together. So how do we do that? It's really hard. So one thing we got to do is just create spaces for us to learn together. And this is a perfect example of us learning together, sitting down, being able to ask questions, being able to talk about things that we know about, and sharing the information we know. And so by doing that, we can also learn from other people. And so it's important through my work that I create those spaces for people to learn together. So I work for an organization that has a huge project and that has many scientists that are working on that project. We have Indigenous scientists working on that project. We also have our Western scientists. So we have a lot of really smart people that have their doctorate degrees. So they went to university for many, many years and they understand physics, they understand engineering, they understand geoscience, which is the study of the rocks, they understand environment, they understand how you protect those things for thousands and millions of years, how we protect Mother Earth. And then we also have Indigenous scientists that are working with us. And that it looks like people that have, went to school. So I went to school for mathematics and physics. So I understand that Western science point of view, but I've also learned from Indigenous knowledge keepers and elders and people in our community that understand that the way the earth works in a different way. And so we're fortunate to be able to create those spaces for us to all learn together. So I'm just going to share a bit of a video that talks a little bit about Indigenous knowledge and learning from some of those elders that I get to work with. So Joe, if you wouldn't mind just playing that video for me, that would be great.
As an organization, we made a formal commitment to interweave Indigenous knowledge into all aspects of our work. A big part of Indigenous knowledge is ceremony. So we need to find ways and opportunities to create space for ceremony in not only the work we're doing on the land and with the communities, but also how we're making big decisions at the NWMO.
I'm honored to be able to offer this tobacco to the sacred bundle. It is that medicine that we put down when we are wanting to acknowledge and give thanks to Mother Earth for all that we receive from her.
For thousands of years, our ancestors of Turtle Island have created bundles, medicine bundles, with the 4 sacred medicines. And a lot of times they're guided spiritually, intuitively, or through vision, what to place in that bundle.
The sweetgrass here today is called the hair of Mother Earth. And when we pray over this medicine as tea, it becomes a medicine of peace.
We are fortunate because now we have a deep understanding of the special spiritual relationship that Indigenous communities have with the land. We also understand that this rock is not just a piece of rock like we used to think, I used to think. This rock represents the grandfathers. The grandfathers have a story to tell. It is our responsibility to listen carefully, respectfully, to understand that story.
Well, ceremony is an important component of Indigenous culture. Finalizing the reconciliation policy through ceremony provided us a way to be a part of it and to feel that connection.
This is where we combine traditional knowledge and Western ways, where we have to do the official work of the NWMO and really make this an official policy for us. And I think it's truly an honor to marry those two cultures. And that's the first step we can all take in building a reconciliation and co-creating our future so that we can do all of our work in a good way going forward.
When we're given spiritual gifts, you're given that gift to use it. whether it's the gift of an eagle feather or the gift of a drum, or even the gift of learning from your dreams. It's something that's passed on to you, and there's an expectation and a responsibility that you use those gifts. And I see that this sacred bundle holds and carries that same responsibility, that we use it in a good way, we use it as a tool as we all embark on this journey together.
The bundle that was created today, with all the items that symbolize something, are going to be taken to communities. And at meetings, we're going to hold that bundle as a reminder. When we hold that sacred bundle, which has been blessed through ceremony, we are going to remember that this is very important.
We're all on this path, and we're put on that path by something bigger than us. And so I think the right people are doing the right work to ensure that these types of opportunities are happening.
Great, thanks, Joe. I just have a couple more things to go through. Oops, sorry, technical error there. Okay, so as you saw, that was an event we had to create those safe spaces to learn together and bring together those two different knowledge systems to make sure we're doing our work in a good way and creating space for both Western science to inform our project and also Indigenous knowledge to inform our project. And by doing that, we're creating a better project, and we're making better decisions because of that. So this is just a picture of the scientists that I get to work with every day. I get to work with elders and Indigenous knowledge keepers. I also get to work with geoscientists and engineers and environmental scientists, and we get to learn about the rocks from different points of view and the environment from different points of view and how things are constructed from different points of view. And so I just, I think this is a great example of, what things could look like in different places if we create space for us to learn together and just create space to understand different knowledge systems and create space for Indigenous voice within how we're doing work within Canada. We talk a lot, Joe had talked a bit about reconciliation and how we can participate in reconciliation. And, I know this, just recently, you guys participated in Orange Shirt Day. Some of the schools participated in Orange Shirt Day to honor those survivors of residential school. And so, I push, I guess, the teachers and the classrooms to expand those conversations. And how do we create space for Indigenous voice within school and Indigenous knowledge within how we're learning? And, I think it's great that we're learning about Indigenous history within Canada. I think that history is really important, but we also have to learn about the present day impacts that Indigenous communities are facing, and also the present day knowledge that they're able to bring and contribute to how we're learning and to how we're making project development happens and how we're making decisions as a country, as organizations, as individuals within that country. And so I just encourage, I encourage the teachers out there and the students out there to create that space for Indigenous voice and Indigenous knowledge within how you're learning about everything within your classroom, because I think it can be applied to the science that we're learning. It can be applied to the social studies when we're learning about Indigenous issues within Canada. Are we learning about that through Indigenous voice, or are we learning that through a Western science interpretation of Indigenous issues in Canada? That might sound a bit complex, but I just want to make sure that we're creating that space for Indigenous voices. And this is a great week to be able to do that within the room. And so with that, I just say miigwech to all of you, and I'm happy to answer any questions. And if you want to learn more about our project, here's our website.
All right. Awesome, Jessica. Thank you so much for sharing with us today. And thank you for...
Okay. So that's my presentation. And like I said, happy to answer any questions or even hear any comments that anybody has.
All right. Awesome, Jessica. Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay?
Joe, are you there?
Yeah, are you able to hear me okay, Jessica?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I think it just didn't kick in right away, so we couldn't hear each other, but I think we're good now.
Yeah, you're a little bit choppy, but I can turn my mic off until there's a question.
Okay. So, yeah, Jessica, thank you so much for sharing that with us today. Thank you for sharing with us that, scientists don't always look the way we think that they do, and that really a lot can come from sharing Western knowledge with Indigenous knowledge and bringing the two together. So thank you so much for that perspective today. We've got a great group of classrooms joining us live today. I want to give a shout out to any legacy schools that are joining us either live on camera or via the YouTube today. Great to see you joining along with us. I want to give a shout out to the classrooms tuning in via YouTube. I can see some have already introduced themselves. So feel free to continue introducing yourself and let me know if you have any questions, because I'll watch for your questions there as well. So let's get going. Let's meet some of our classrooms. We're going to go to Mrs. Gill's class first. They are a grade 5-6 class. They are joining us in Cambridge, Ontario. Let's bring them live into the call here. There they are. How are we doing, Mrs. Gill's group?
Hello. You can wave, Gilvillians.
Hello. Hello.
One of the students in the class has a questions about the medicines. You were talking about using plants for natural medicines, and they want to know how some of those work.
I think people are frozen on my end. I can't hear you, Joe.
Can you hear me at all, Jessica?
I can hear you, but it's really just choppy.
Why don't you try exiting and follow the link again? Maybe things just got slowed down a little bit.
Okay.
And then maybe it'll unfreeze for us. But Mrs. Gill's class, you can hear me okay, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So Jessica, try and exit and then follow the same link I sent you to join us. And we'll try that.
You want me to exit?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll give Jessica a second to come back to us and join us. I'll give a little shout out here. We got Mrs. Howard's group joining us in Kingston. Great to have you joining us. So feel free to use that chat sidebar to send us in a question. And then once we get Jessica back in, hopefully everybody unfreezes for her. And then we'll continue with our Q&A action. Maybe I'll take a minute now while we do wait for Jessica to join us, just to share a couple links that you can check out throughout the week. So the first one that I want to remind everybody of is the Downey Wenjack Fund website. So you can find it here. Any classrooms that are joining us that aren't legacy schools yet, you might want to dive in a little bit deeper and learn about how your classrooms can join in with us. And it looks like I see Jessica. Let me bring her back in. Hey, Jessica.
Hi, sorry about that. Things are a lot better now. I can hear everybody.
Sometimes things just slow down and a reboot is all it takes. So
okay.
Mrs. Gill's group, 5-6s. Do you want to ask that question again, Mrs. Gill?
Would someone like to ask that question? Evan, go ahead. Up to the screen. Yeah, go about plants and how they're used for medicines. How plants are used for medicine.
How are the plants used for medicines?
Well, within our communities, we have lots of different plants that are used for all different sorts of medicine. So, like I mentioned, cedar is one of our plants that we use for medicines, but we also have so many different ones. So whether it's the leaves of a specific plant or the roots sometimes of a specific plant, and people, there's doctors within our communities that know how all those different things work. And so they collect those medicines and they're able to treat people for different illnesses with different plants that we have in our community. And sometimes different animals provide plants or provide medicine as well. So for instance, we use the fat from a bear, the animal, a bear, we use the fat from it, and we can use that on our joints when our muscles are sore or our joints are sore. So our bones are sore, we can use that as a medicine. So there's all sorts of different medicines. I don't have that. I don't know if we have the time to go into all of those different types of medicines, but yeah, a lot of different plants. And even animals are used for medicines.
Okay.
Any other?
And I think, that's a really important thing to bring up, is that, the majority of the medicines we use are plant-based. And, a lot of them, indigenous peoples were using the plants in their environment in different forms. So it's really, it's awesome to see how that knowledge can be passed to us and used in Western society as well. Very cool.
Yeah, and in sometimes throughout history, the knowledge of how those different plants were used for medicine were actually stolen from the indigenous people, and they weren't given credit for having that knowledge or having that medicine, and so that's why sometimes there's a bit of reluctancy for indigenous communities to share their knowledge, because throughout history that knowledge has either been stolen or it hasn't been given the credit to the actual knowledge holders. So that's just something to know too.
Okay, let's bring another classroom in here with us. We're going to go to Mrs. Papadopoulos' group. They're joining us in Burlington. How are we doing today, Burlington? Oh, you muted on us, Mrs. Papadopoulos.
Sorry, I thought I unmuted you, but I muted you. Yeah, we're good. Thanks.
All right, excellent. Does anybody have a question for Jessica today?
You guys have any questions? I have a question. It's about sweetgrass.
Mm-hmm.
So I was just wondering, where does sweetgrass grow?
Well, sweetgrass grows kind of all over the place, but primarily it grows out in southern Ontario. It grows also in the west. It doesn't really grow up north really, but it is one of our sacred medicines, and it's actually called the medicine of kindness and goodness. And so when we use sweetgrass, we actually use it to think good thoughts and make sure that we're spreading that kindness and thinking about that kindness when we drink it. And and it actually, when we talk about bringing knowledge systems together, I have a braid of sweetgrass here. We talk about weaving different knowledge systems like a braid of sweetgrass so that you have different knowledge systems coming together. And by doing that, you make the braid stronger and it becomes a really strong piece of sweetgrass when you do that. So that's something that we've talked a bit about in our work, is how do we make sure we're doing that weaving and that braiding together.
All right. We're going to bring another classroom in live here with us. St. Paul's, Mrs. Roy's group is joining us in Peterborough. How are we doing today, Peterborough?
You can wave.
All right. Do we have a question for Jessica?
Okay, come on over, Landon. Nice and loud.
Is that an eagle feather that you're holding?
Yes, this is an eagle feather. This is an eagle feather that was gifted to me by a friend of mine. And what's really important about the eagle feather and the eagle itself is that the eagle has that gift to make sure that we have balance, right? And that we need both wings of that eagle to fly smoothly in our journey, right? And so when I hold that eagle feather, I think of that balance that we all need, right? We all need the balance of laughter and also the balance of, being serious and listening in class sometimes. And that's what I think about my work, is we need the balance of two different knowledge systems to make my work better. But it is an eagle feather. Thank you.
Are eagles in Canada?
Yes, they are. They are in Canada. Bald eagles. There's a lot of different eagles in Canada.
All right. Thanks for the question. Okay, let's jump to another class here. I'm going to bring Mrs. Chang's group in. They're joining us in Toronto, Ontario. Looks like some grade 8 students. Mrs. Chang, if you want to go ahead and unmute for me, we'd love to grab a question. Looks like you're ready.
You have a question?
Hey, Toronto.
Hi.
Hi.
They love this presentation. We were just, we've been actually discussing, like, embedding the secret path into our language and history program. So they've really taken a great interest in trying to make interpretations themselves on some of the work. Sorry, I know this is feedback. So thank you so much for this presentation and just your insight and knowledge.
Thank you so much.
Wave.
All right. Does anybody have a question? You don't have to be shy if you have one.
Anyone have a question? I think they're okay.
That's okay. Mrs. Hank, if you do have a question, just shoot me a message in the private chat, and I'll make sure I come back. Okay. Let's take a little trip now. Let's go to Mrs. Tram Pleasure's group. So they are joining us from London. Let's bring them into the call. Mrs. Tram Pleasure's group. So they are joining us from London. They're on a slight delay, so we're going to hear a little bit as they catch up to us.
All right. We have Ty here. He's going to ask a question.
Hey, Ty.
Hello. Come right up to the camera. Hello, everybody.
Hi, Ty.
Talk, so I can't have the feedback. Go ahead. Jessica, what is your opinion on the lobster conflict in Atlantic Canada right now?
Wow, that's a great question. What my opinion is I think it's really sad, first of all, that there has to be conflict amongst all of us trying to live peacefully in Canada. But what it really speaks to me about is the importance of education and the importance of making sure that we all have the same knowledge about the Indigenous history within Canada and how Indigenous people in Canada are still alive and thriving and have so much to offer. And we just need to make sure we create more space to provide that education to all of Canada within our schools, but also outside of schools, within organizations we're working with, within communities, within many different forums. So I just think it's really important that we keep talking and trying to learn together so that we can have a better understanding of how we work together in Canada.
All right. Well, there's Mrs. Howard's group who are joining us in Kingston. They're really curious about traditional medicines as well. And so, it kind of got me thinking about, you think of your traditional science where maybe you start with a hypothesis, you do experiments, and you kind of work through it like that. Jessica, is there any insight you can share with us on how the process might be, in Indigenous communities? How that kind of knowledge was learned? Do you think it was kind of some trial and error? Was it just being really familiar with the land and observing things? How do you think some of that knowledge came to be about the plants and the medicines?
Well, I think that there's similarities between different knowledge systems based on, observing things and making, different observations through experience is really important. And I think it's relatable to both knowledge systems. I just think sometimes it looks a little bit differently. And I think that's okay, right? So going to do research in a laboratory, for instance, on how, what the makeup of a different plant may be a little bit different within Indigenous communities. Sometimes they, instead of going to a laboratory, they're using those medicines in different ways, observing the effects of those. And sometimes they're observing how the animals or the birds or the insects are also reacting to those different things. And so, for instance, there's birds that ingest clay, and they ingest that clay so that they can eat poisonous plants and animals, and that their stomachs are kept safe. So Indigenous people have actually been using clay medicinally for many years, and they understand that protection mechanism clay has when you ingest it. So when we take things like Pepto-Bismol or something when we're sick, there's actually like clay within that medicine. But it's also a medicine we've been using for many years in our communities with that same understanding of how it works. So I think some things are similar, but I think sometimes the process of getting there looks a bit different. And so sometimes people think that things have to happen a certain way in order for it to be validated, when in fact it doesn't. And sometimes going to ceremony, for instance, where people within communities have different gifts to go to ceremony, and they're given advice from from the spirit world on how different things work. And that's a big part of the knowledge system as well, that we need, I think, bridge a bit more understanding about what that element looks like. But I think just being open to different ways of doing things. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. So we've got a couple minutes left before we're going to wrap up today, Jessica. So I want to give our classrooms, give me a wave at the camera if we should visit your classroom one more time to sneak in another question before we wrap up our first event today. So I think I see, am I seeing hands in Peterborough? Let me check in.
Okay, Ariana, you want to come up? Okay, so what
type of bird do you use to make your coats?
What type of bird? Sorry, what?
What type of bird do you use to make your coats?
So what type of animal fur do you use to make some clothing?
Oh, so a lot of different animal fur is used for clothing. There's usually the hides of moose or deer or buffalo were primarily used just because they're big animals and they could use a lot of different, they had a lot of space to be able to make clothing, but then also different other animals provided decoration for different aspects of clothing. So you have feathers from birds, or you know, things like rabbit that have fur on it are used, otters. So all sorts of different animals. When they when people hunt animals or trap animals, they always use every aspect of that animal. So it's used in some sort of way or another, whether it's through making different parts of their regalia for decoration or for actually covering the clothes. They're all parts are used. So a lot of different animals.
Okay, and I've got a great question to wrap up on. Mrs. Gill's class sent one in via YouTube. And they're wondering, how might non-Indigenous people connect with elders or knowledge keepers about traditional, science or use of plants or things like that? How can someone connect?
So I think there's lots of different opportunities for people to connect. So within the school system, for instance, reach out to your First Nation or Métis neighbors in the area or Inuit neighbors in the area and see if they have knowledge keepers within their community that would be willing to come and do something in the classroom and share things in that way. Also, YouTube has a lot of great examples of how people are doing that. And, there's a lot of different education guides on things that were created by Indigenous people on how to integrate education from an Indigenous point of view within the classrooms. There's a lot of different guides that way. So I think there's a lot of different things. I think you just be creative. But my first advice is to, reach out to your neighbors and find out how they can help you learn and create that space to learn together. Because I think it's really great if we can all, sit down and talk to each other and learn together, because there is, people want to share their knowledge. They're proud of their knowledge. It's been in our communities for generations. And what I think is important is giving credit to that knowledge and recognizing the knowledge keepers that are sharing that knowledge, and making sure that we're not taking it on as our own, that we're acknowledging those voices and those knowledge carriers that are giving us that knowledge.
All right. Well, I want to start off with a couple links that I want to share with the groups that are joining us. So again, I'll share this link one more time. This is to the Downey Wenjack website. You can find all kinds of information, especially if you're not a legacy school, on how you could join and take part. You can find some cool resources there as well, and other Secret Path Week activities that are taking place. And the next link that I want to share is if you visit exploringbytheseat.com, you can use the link, or you can look under events, special events, and choose Secret Path Week. We have a lot of great events coming up this week. It's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to learn from so many Indigenous leaders, artists, scientists, and more. It really is going to be a great week. So I want to give a shout out to our classrooms who joined us on YouTube. Thank you to all the classrooms who joined us on camera for today's event and all the great questions. And Jessica, a huge shout out to you today as well. Thank you so much for the work you're doing around reconciliation and really kind of bridging that gap between Western science and Indigenous traditional knowledge and science. So thank you so much for the work you're doing. Oh, sorry.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and thanks for all your questions, and thanks for inviting me into your classroom today. It was honestly an honor and a pleasure. And good luck in your learning adventures for the year. Miigwech.
All right. Thank you, everyone. We are going live at 11 a.m. Eastern with our next event. We're going to meet Megan Lordy, and she works with the Jane Goodall Institute. And she's going to talk about some of the work she's doing around reconciliation. So if you stick around our YouTube channel, you'll see that event when it goes live, or you can find the link on exploringbytheseat.com. Thanks again, everyone. Thank you so much, Jessica, and enjoy the rest of your week.
Thanks. Bye.